Where were you in 1984 when the Van Halen song came out, 1984? I was 14 years old, and I remember vividly where I was the first time I heard it. I went to my cousin's house for a family get-together. There were 3 cousins, all about my age, and they pulled out a giant boombox and put it on the bureau. And normally that meant we were about to hear some blaring AC/DC for the next 30 minutes with screaming guitars and loud vocals, something I wasn't necessarily keen to enjoy. But they said, wait till you hear this. They pushed play. I waited quietly, thinking, oh, here we go again. And lo and behold, this sound came out. Gorgeous synthesizers, sophisticated, interesting, otherworldly. I was blown away. I already loved, the sound of synthesizers since I was a young kid, but this was really way ahead of its time, and it was like I was being transported somewhere else. And I get that feeling that you get when you first hear a tune that you know this is special, this is going to be with you for the rest of your life. And that is so true about this particular piece, and I'll never forget that moment, first hearing 1984. And that was followed up shortly thereafter with the song called Jump. So according to sources, this all came about when Eddie was noodling in the studio, and he was just fooling around playing this ethereal type music, but they were secretly recording him while he was doing that, and they ended up taking those bits and pieces and putting it into like the final version of this. This tune serves as a kind of atmospheric overture, setting the stage for the song Jump, and I think it's a perfect intro to that. It's also a perfect intro to the album 1984, released that same year in January. So this is a special moment in time, and we're capturing it here on the Nord keyboards. Specifically, the Nord Stage 4 is where I'll be demonstrating this or talking about it more. And the good news is, if you have a Nord Stage 3 or Stage 4, as of this recording, you can get this completed program downloadable for you if you're already enrolled in either of my master classes, Master the Nord Stage 3 or Master the Nord Stage 4. The sound is part of that. It's in the bonus section. Then, if you are a Patreon member, I make it available there for you as well. If you're a member, you can download the sound. And then, if you aren't a member of Patreon, but you just want the sound for a quick fix, you can just go to the Patreon page. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can buy that tune just for one low price, grab and go. You'll have it there for your Nord keyboard. So, without further ado, let me break this down a little bit for you. This is a momentous occasion. It's been on my bucket list for a long time, so I'm finally glad to have it here for you so we can enjoy it together. So here on the Nord Stage 4, I have a program called 1984. We have a split happening right here, close to the middle of the keyboard. This camera is oriented to the right so that we can see the synth and the effects happening on these sounds. I do have 3 sounds. The first sound here on panel A, or layer A, is playing on the left side, and that's the swooping bass part. Then we have the high strings, synth strings on layer 2, and then layer 3, we have the very ending where we have that gurgly type sound effect happening just at the end. You saw me do it in the video. All right, so first this sound. This is the bass sound. Now you don't see me play the keys here, but I'm playing C sharp or D flat in octaves or 1 octave. So half of this sound is what feels like the delay. So if I take off the delay, that really smooths the sound out. We can hear it better, more in its raw state. So we have a filter opening up and then closing as we come down. And that's all done here with this filter envelope. And we start off with a interesting waveform combination. It is the sawtooth over a square wave, which is known as a sub-square saw, with a certain mix, and that combines both of those, but you can mix them simply by choosing this option here. So that would be all sawtooth versus all square wave. Here, all more hollow, that is. So there's a combination of things happening there. And then, like I said, the filter, and using a low-pass Moog filter. And really no keyboard tracking on this because it plays towards the bottom part of the keyboard anyway. and there's no drive. So yeah, the unison on this is a 2, which is fine for this bass sound. We'll talk about the unison a little bit more when we get to the next sound. And then, like I mentioned already, a lot of the magic comes from the delay on this. So once you add the delay back in, the moment you hit the note, you'll hear already a pulsing based on this delay tempo here that you can see with the blinking light. So wow, wow, wow. And same on the exit of that sound. So if you were to speed that up, you kind of hear other Rush songs maybe. That sounds like a little bit like the beginning of 2112. And I have another sound that I've done for the Nord Stage 3 with 2112, so I won't go down that path just yet, but that is a lot of the magic. And then we have, standard reverb. I do add a little compression here. I don't know to what degree, but it brings out the volume a little bit. And as far as EQ goes, yeah, there's some of that happening too here. So that's the gist of that sound. Then for the next sound, we have the high strings. So special about this is the long attack and the even longer release. You hear how that lingers? What that allows you to do is when you're playing these and you hold them, when you go to the next chord, you're still hearing a lot of the chord that came before it, which gives it that overlapping effect. As far as a waveform goes, we're using the famous supersaw with a detune of 2.9. Now, most sounds that I do, and a lot of the sounds that you'll hear from days gone by, is they use an even thicker sawtooth combination where you'd want to put unison on at full blast and you'd want to detune this even more to a 3.3 or even higher. And I did that. I left it lower and no unison on purpose because if you listen closely to the album, it's a very thin sawtooth waveform. Yes, there's multiple happening, but it isn't overly thick. There's a little bit of weakness to it, a little bit of thinness. I can't explain it except to say that it's just opposite of this. Now, when you add the unison and you add the detune, you'll hear it really thick. Now, personally, I love the way that sounds, but for this song, that's not the way it was recorded. As good as that sounds, I could play this all day because I really love that thick. But that's not what we hear. That's not the way it was presented by Eddie. So we go back to what it was, or similar to what it was. It's a lot thinner. Get up here. Lots of reverb. Let's just see how much reverb we're using. 4.1, so the wet-dry mix is right around here. Not too bad, but the hall, it's definitely a hall, and I put it for bright. And we are using a little vibe on here to give it a little bit more of a chorusy effect or a vibe. I wanted to emulate a little bit of the waveforms going out of tune. And sometimes you can do that by adding vibe or even some chorus. Sounds a little bit more out of tune. I would have loved it a little bit more. If I added more, what would happen? Yeah, it's a little too much. So if you want to emulate synths of old, you can just play with the rate and the amount on your vibe. And I'm using the variation here for this too. And that'll give it a little bit of a wavering effect, which sometimes you actually hear on original albums because synths were notoriously out of tune or going out of tune or phasing in and out of tune while they were being recorded. Other ways to do that is the unison itself. But the unison does a little bit of a detune, but it also greatly thickens it and widens the stereo image of it. So sometimes the unison you'll take away that thinness. That's how that works. Same filter, LPM, low pass Moog. This time we are using some KB track to 2/3. You'll want the KB track if you want to hear brightness in the right hand. If you don't want to hear as much brightness, you can turn that off and let the filter sort of diminish it naturally. So you compare that to this. You hear a lot more raspy when you have the KB track high. Kind of like that detune I have going on now. It's a little too much. All right, now the third sound, this is a pure saw, and how we make that gurgle is we have to add an LFO to it. Okay, so this is a LFO filter here, and what you do is you need this waveform. This is the sample and hold waveform, which I also think of as a random waveform. And when you do that, you can imitate that gurgle that you hear at the end. Let me just turn off the other two and keep this one on. And the rate is obviously very fast. So that's how you can imitate that. And just to prove that point, if you were to change this to a square, see, it would be totally different in terms of the pattern. So that's how you do that. Now, I haven't gone into every single parameter of these 3 layers. I recommend you just get the sound from the sources that I already mentioned, and then you can download it and reverse engineer it by holding the monitor button and twisting the knob. It'll tell you the exact parameters of each of these, but it takes a little bit of time to do that here on camera, and I'm trying to keep the focus as a general overview as to what's happening rather than a step-by-step how to imitate the sound. I'll leave you with this thought. Imagine being Eddie Van Halen in the studio and being presented with this keyboard, not the Nord keyboard, but the keyboard that he had, and just fooling around for 45 minutes and just coming up with different And then I recommend probably putting the higher part a little higher, the lower part a little lower, and then add the unison on the high part, and then bring up that to a 3, let's say 3.5, and have fun with that. Be very inspirational for your next tune or for your next creative moment. Thanks for joining me on this video. We will catch you on the next one.